My grandfather, Rufus Alexander Crowell, died when I was 5.5 years old, but I have fond memories of him. I grew up in the house that he and my grandmother, Mamie Lawrence Crowell, built, and he lived next door with my aunt and uncle, Aunt Myrna and Uncle Paul Ivy. Since his 4 children were teens, he had been in failing health with paralysis in his legs and eventually in his voice. His mind was active, though, and by the time I came along, he communicated by typing and moved about in his wooden wheelchair. Except for Betsy and Martha Ivy and me, most of the grandchildren were a bit fearful of him. But he and I communicated quite well in our way, and I recall often having to explain to adults what it was he wanted. He laughed and showed interest in hearing me tell about whatever a 5-year-old wanted to talk about, and he pointed out things of interest to me from the volumes that surrounded him in his sunny room. He was born in Lylesville, which is now New London, in 1869, and was one of the first Stanley County men to graduate from the University in Chapel Hill. He read law and came to Albemarle to practice. He had a great interest in civic affairs, education, and politics. He was secretary of the school board, which is a job sort of like the superintendent of schools now. It paid $2 a day. Its duties were to meet with the board 4 times a year, spend Saturdays in his office, hold examinations for prospective teachers, grant teaching certificates, and sign vouchers. Also, in the 1890s, he edited the local newspaper and was clerk of the Superior Court. In 1897, he joined with J.S. Eford, J.M. Morrow, and J.W. Cannon to start the Albemarle Telephone Company, which operated until 1934, when the Concord Telephone Company took over. At that time, the company had 554 telephones. The cost of service was $1.50 a month for homes and $2 for businesses. In 1905, several prominent business leaders in Albemarle recognized a need for electric power. The Albemarle Light and Water Company was incorporated under a capital stock of $25,000 by J.M. Morrow, J.S. Eford, A.L. Patterson, R.L. Smith, and R.A. Crowell. Within a few years, the municipal light and water were available to citizens of Albemarle. Among Rufus's law clients was Dr. Francis Croh, who had 2 unmarried daughters. Crowell was appointed administrator of the estate at their death. He arranged for the disposition of the land and property at public auction. In the 1930s, the Croh Estate and some additional land was transferred to the North Carolina Division of State Parks and became Morrow Mountain State Park. When I was growing up, there was a fascinating chest of papers, an attic treasure at our house for me. It had composition books from the Croh girls' days at St. Mary's School, lists of medicinal plants that Dr. Croh prescribed, and grocery lists with their costs at the time, as well as beautiful botanical drawings by Addie and Elizabeth Croh. After Jay and I were married, I gave these papers to the Southern Historical Collection at UNC Chapel Hill, where his grandmother had been instrumental in organizing. Deeply interested in the development of Albemarle, my grandfather was one of the organizers of the Lillian Mill in 1905 and served as its president. He organized the Albemarle Furniture Company in 1906, where the Austin Hosiery Mill later stood, and the Albemarle Mantle Company nearby. The cause of Pawpaw's paralysis was unknown, but he sought treatment at Johns Hopkins in Hot Springs, Arkansas. He had a letter from Franklin Roosevelt in 1928 encouraging him to come to Warm Springs. He was remarkable in the way he handled his infirmities and continued his vision of making Albemarle an industrial center. On account of his voice paralysis, he had to give up the law and started R.A. Crowell and Sons Insurance Agency in 1931, which is the forerunner of the old Albemarle Insurance Agency. Although a partial invalid, he went to the office daily. My father took him and brought him home every day for lunch and back in the afternoon until about 15 years before he died at age 83. He was an active member of Central Methodist Church and the Masonic Lodge. A man of indomitable will and courage, he fought off his affliction and lived beyond the normal lifespan at the time. He always sought to be a useful citizen, and in his early years extended an unusual amount of energy and time in the development of Albemarle. Among my family's things that I ran across in doing this was a note from William L. Mann to my Aunt Myrna when Pawpaw died, saying that without Mr. Crowell, there wouldn't be an Albemarle.